My name is Dr. James Rodriguez, Chief Medical Examiner, Metro Forensic Center. 19 years examining the dead, determining causes, signing certificates. Board certified in anatomic pathology and forensic pathology. I've seen overdoses, murders, accidents, suicides. Bodies tell stories. The dead don't lie, until last Tuesday when everything I understood about death became questionable. Case ME 2024-1847 arrived at 3:47 a.m. Male, approximately 35 years old, found hanging in apartment by landlord. Obvious ligature marks around neck, petechial hemorrhaging in eyes. No pulse, no respiration. Body temperature consistent with death occurring 6 to 8 hours prior. Standard suicide by asphyxiation. I've processed hundreds of similar cases. Detective Rodriguez briefed me while I prepared for preliminary examination. Names Anthony Walsh, 34, unemployed graphic designer. Neighbors heard nothing unusual. Door was locked from inside, no signs of struggle. Note found on kitchen table, handwritten confession about financial troubles and depression. Textbook suicide doc. Initial external examination revealed typical findings. Rigor mortis beginning in jaw and neck muscles, consistent with timeline. Liver mortis showing dependent pooling along back and legs. No defensive wounds, no indication of foul play. The hanging apparatus, electrical cord from ceiling fan, showed wear patterns matching body weight suspension. I photographed the ligature marks, measured their dimensions, noted the upward angle indicating suspension. The furrow was deep, approximately 2 centimeters wide, extending from beneath the left ear across the throat to the right mastoid process. Classic presentation of suicidal hanging. Nothing suggested this case would become the most disturbing of my career. During preparation for autopsy, I noticed unusual muscle tension in the arms. Not rigor mortis, something different. The fingers seemed to grip rather than relax into death's typical positioning. I attributed this to cadaveric spasm, occasionally seen in suicide cases where the victim's final conscious act creates muscle rigidity. Standard procedure requires photographing the body from all angles before internal examination. As I adjusted the head position for lateral neck photos, I felt resistance. Significant resistance. Fresh corpses don't resist positioning unless rigor mortis has advanced considerably, which wasn't the case here based on environmental temperature and estimated time of death. The autopsy suite maintained its usual chill. 62 degrees Fahrenheit to slow decomposition. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I'd performed this routine thousands of times. Remove clothing. Examine for additional trauma. Document findings. The body should have been completely pliant at this stage. Instead, Anthony Walsh felt almost reactive. I began the Y-incision, standard procedure from shoulders to sternum to pubis. The scalpel moved through skin and subcutaneous tissue normally. No unusual bleeding. Circulation had ceased hours ago, but as I reflected the skin flaps back to expose the chest cavity, I noticed something that made me pause mid-procedure. The thoracic muscles showed signs of recent oxygenation. Not possible given the timeline, but the tissue coloration suggested blood flow more recent than the estimated death time. I double-checked my notes, confirmed the discovery timeline. 6 to 8 hours deceased, found hanging, no pulse or respiration. Yet the muscle tissue appeared fresher. Proceeding with rib removal to access internal organs, I encountered more resistance. The ribs didn't separate cleanly as expected in a deceased individual. It felt like operating on someone under anesthesia rather than a corpse. 19 years of experience told me this was wrong. Bodies don't behave this way post-mortem. Heart examination revealed typical findings for asphyxiation death. Enlarged right ventricle from final struggle for oxygen. Lungs showed expected edema and hemorrhaging, but the organ temperatures registered higher than they should have. Internal body temperature should match environmental conditions after several hours. These readings suggested continued metabolic activity. I needed consultation. Dr. Marcus Webb, forensic pathologist with 30 years' experience, arrived within minutes. "James, what's got you puzzled?" He examined the body, reviewed my findings, checked the temperature readings himself. "This is unusual. The tissue preservation is remarkable for the supposed time frame. Are you certain about the timeline?" We verified details with Detective Rodriguez. Landlord discovered the body at 2:30 a.m., called police immediately. Scene photographs showed clear rigor mortis beginning, body position consistent with several hours of suspension. Yet, our examination suggested death occurred more recently. Medical evidence contradicted physical evidence from the scene. Dr. Webb suggested we complete the autopsy and request additional toxicology screening. Perhaps an unknown substance affected decomposition rates or created preservation effects we hadn't encountered. We'd seen strange reactions to bath salts, synthetic drugs, experimental chemicals. Modern street drugs sometimes produced unprecedented physiological responses. As I prepared to examine the brain, removing the skull cap with standard oscillating saw, something impossible happened. The body moved, not a reflexive twitch or muscle spasm. Those occur occasionally during autopsy. This was purposeful movement. The left hand lifted slightly, fingers flexing as if testing mobility. Dr. Webb and I froze. In 49 combined years of forensic pathology, neither of us had witnessed anything similar. Bodies don't move during autopsy unless external forces cause movement. No electrical stimulation equipment was active. No one else was in the room. The hand definitely moved intentionally. "Marcus, did you see that?" I whispered, though whispering seemed absurd given the circumstances. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the body. We stood motionless, waiting. The hand moved again, this time more deliberately. The fingers spread, then closed into a loose fist. Impossible, but undeniably happening. Standard protocol demanded we stop the procedure immediately and contact supervisors. Unexplained movement during autopsy required investigation, documentation, possibly removal of the body for additional examination. But before I could reach for the phone, something even more impossible occurred. The body spoke. "The water is cold." 3 words, clearly articulated, spoken in a normal conversational tone. The voice seemed to emanate from the throat despite the extensive neck trauma and exposed chest cavity. Dr. Webb stepped backward, nearly knocking over the instrument tray. I remained frozen, scalpel still in hand. The eyes opened. Not the cloudy, vacant stare of death, but clear, focused eyes that moved purposefully around the room. They settled on my face with unmistakable recognition. "Dr. Rodriguez," the voice said, "you're cutting me up." The tone carried mild curiosity rather than distress, as if commenting on weather. Every medical protocol screamed that this was impossible. The extensive autopsy incisions, the exposed organs, the neck trauma. No living person could speak or maintain consciousness with these injuries. Yet Anthony Walsh was clearly aware, alert, and communicating. My understanding of life and death crumbled in that moment. "This can't be happening," Dr. Webb muttered, backing toward the door. 19 years, I whispered, more to myself than him. 19 years of autopsies. Bodies don't wake up, Marcus. The dead don't talk. But Anthony Walsh was doing both, despite medical impossibility. The body attempted to sit up, remarkably succeeding despite the massive chest incision. Organs remained visible through the opening, heart and lungs functioning normally, despite exposure to air and surgical manipulation. "I need to tell you something important," he said calmly. "About the others." I found my voice finally. "Anthony, you're supposed to be dead. You were found hanging, no vital signs. We've been conducting your autopsy for 40 minutes. He nodded, as if this information was unsurprising. I know. I watched you work. You're very thorough, Doctor. Dr. Webb had reached the door but hadn't left. Professional curiosity overcame fear. What do you remember about dying? He asked. Anthony considered the question thoughtfully. I remember hanging myself. The pain, then darkness, then watching you examine my body from above. I've been watching this whole time. From above? I asked. Yes, floating near the ceiling. I could see everything you did, hear everything you said. When you mentioned the tissue preservation, I knew I had to come back. There are things you need to understand about what's happening at this hospital. Against every rational instinct, I found myself engaging in conversation with a dead man. What things, Anthony? He struggled to maintain sitting position, organs still exposed, but determined to communicate. The other suicides, in this hospital, they're not all suicides, Dr. Rodriguez. What do you mean? Dr. Webb had approached again, scientific curiosity overriding shock. Anthony looked directly at him. 3 patients in the psychiatric ward, Sarah Martinez, James Wilson, Rebecca Thompson, all supposedly killed themselves last month. Check their files, check how they died. I knew those names. All 3 had been found dead in the secure psychiatric ward. Hanging, overdose, and slashed wrists respectively. Standard protocol cases, no suspicious circumstances. But Anthony's specificity unsettled me. How would he know about psychiatric ward deaths? He wasn't a patient here, patient. How do you know about those cases? I asked. Anthony's expression grew urgent. Because I watched them die. I watched who killed them. That's why I'm here. Why I came back. Someone is murdering patients and making it look like suicide. You have to stop them. The logical part of my mind screamed that this was hallucination, stress-induced breakdown, or elaborate hoax. But the medical evidence was undeniable. Anthony Walsh was conscious, speaking, functioning despite fatal injuries and hours of confirmed death. If he could defy death, perhaps his information deserved consideration. Who? Dr. Webb demanded. Who's killing patients? Anthony tried to respond but suddenly convulsed. The wounds began bleeding again, fresh blood flowing from the chest incision. His breathing became labored. Running out of time, he gasped. Check the security footage. Night shift nurse, 3rd floor. Which nurse? I pressed, but Anthony was fading. His eyes lost focus, the clear awareness dimming. Rebecca Torres, he whispered. She's done it before. Other hospitals. Look for the pattern. His voice weakened with each word. The impossible consciousness that had animated him was departing. Within seconds, Anthony Walsh collapsed back onto the table. The eyes clouded over, returning to the vacant stare of death. No pulse, no respiration, no response to stimuli. He had died again, returning to the state we'd initially found him in. The brief, impossible interlude was over. Dr. Webb and I stood in stunned silence. The autopsy suite felt colder, more clinical than ever before. The exposed organs no longer showed signs of life. Body temperature was dropping normally. Every indication suggested we'd just witnessed something medically impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. We need to document this, I said finally. Every detail, every word. Dr. Webb nodded numbly. Who's going to believe us? A dead man sat up during autopsy and accused someone of murder. They'll think we've lost our minds. But we had a professional obligation to report everything. Before calling supervisors, I accessed the hospital database to check on Anthony's claims. Sarah Martinez, age 28, found hanging in her room on October 15th. James Wilson, age 34, drug overdose, October 18th. Rebecca Thompson, age 31, slashed wrists, October 22nd, all on the psychiatric ward 3rd floor. The dates were accurate. Anthony Walsh had never been a patient at Metro Forensic Center. He had no connection to the psychiatric ward, no way to know about those specific deaths unless he'd somehow witnessed them as claimed. The implications were staggering. I pulled up the staff schedules for those dates. Rebecca Torres, RN, had worked night shifts on all 3 occasions. 15-year nursing veteran with exemplary records, no disciplinary actions, no patient complaints. Nothing in her file suggested homicidal tendencies, yet Anthony had specifically named her. Security footage would be archived for 30 days. I contacted hospital administration, explaining we needed to review third-floor psychiatric ward surveillance for late October. I didn't mention the autopsy conversation. That would come later, with documentation and witnesses. For now, I focused on verifiable facts. Dr. Webb completed the autopsy while I handled administrative calls. Final cause of death: asphyxiation due to hanging, manner of death, suicide. The physical evidence supported these conclusions. The brief period of impossible consciousness wasn't reflected in any measurable medical parameters. Officially, Anthony Walsh had never awakened. Hospital security provided the requested footage within 2 hours. Dr. Webb and I reviewed it privately before involving administrators. October 15th, 11:47 p.m., Rebecca Torres entering Sarah Martinez's room. Security camera showed her remaining inside for 12 minutes. She emerged alone, documented the room check normally. October 18th, 2:23 a.m. Torres again, entering James Wilson's room during routine medication rounds. The timestamp showed 17 minutes inside. No other staff members were present on the floor. Wilson was found dead at 6:15 a.m. during shift change. October 22nd footage was most disturbing. Torres entered Rebecca Thompson's room at 1:15 a.m. This time, we could see her carrying something small, possibly syringes or medication. She remained inside 23 minutes. Thompson was discovered at 7:30 a.m. with slashed wrists, razor found beside her bed. This doesn't prove murder, Dr. Webb noted. Extended room visits could have legitimate explanations. Maybe these patients were agitated, required additional attention. Torres might have been providing comfort or medical care. But the timing was suspicious. All 3 deaths occurred hours after her prolonged visits. I contacted Detective Rodriguez, explained our concerns about potential pattern in psychiatric ward deaths. I didn't mention Anthony's impossible awakening. That would undermine credibility. Instead, I focused on statistical analysis. 3 deaths in 1 week, same nurse on duty, extended room visits before discovery. Rodriguez was skeptical but agreed to investigate. You're talking about a respected nurse with 15 years of service. These were high-risk patients in psychiatric care. Suicide rates are naturally higher in that population. What makes you think there's criminal activity? Pattern recognition, I explained. The timing, the staff scheduling, the extended room visits, it warrants investigation. Rodriguez agreed to interview Torres and review her employment history. If she'd worked at other hospitals with similar unexplained deaths, it would support our suspicions. Meanwhile, I struggled with the impossible experience in the autopsy suite. How do you document a dead man's testimony? How do you explain consciousness persisting after clinical death? My medical training provided no framework for understanding what had occurred. Dr. Webb shared my confusion. In 30 years, I've never questioned the finality of death. We measure brain activity, cardiac function, cellular metabolism. When those cease, consciousness ends. Anthony Walsh challenged everything I thought I knew about the boundary between life and death. That evening, I researched near-death experiences, out-of-body phenomena, consciousness studies. Theoretical physics suggested possibilities beyond current medical understanding. Quantum mechanics, non-local consciousness, information fields persisting after biological death. But theories couldn't explain what I'd witnessed. The next morning brought disturbing news. Detective Rodriguez's investigation revealed that Rebecca Torres had worked at 3 hospitals over the past decade. Each facility had reported higher than average suicide rates during her employment. Statistical analysis showed the correlation was unlikely to be coincidental. Phoenix General Hospital. Torres worked there from 2019 to 2021. Psychiatric ward suicides increased 40% during her tenure. Desert View Medical Center, 2021 to 2023. Similar patterns. Metro Forensic Center, 2023 to present. 3 deaths in 1 week after months without incidents. Armed with this evidence, Rodriguez obtained warrants to search Torres's home and locker. They discovered journals detailing her mercy missions, killing patients she deemed beyond help. Detailed entries described methods for inducing death while avoiding detection. She'd been murdering vulnerable patients for years. Torres's arrest made local headlines. Nurse charged with multiple murders at area hospitals. The psychiatric ward deaths were reclassified as homicides. Families of victims filed lawsuits. Hospital administration launched internal investigations. Justice system processes moved forward normally, but questions remained about how the crimes were discovered. I never revealed Anthony Walsh's impossible testimony in official reports. Dr. Webb and I agreed the information would be dismissed as hallucination or fabrication. Instead, we credited statistical analysis and pattern recognition for identifying the suspicious deaths. The truth was too extraordinary for official documentation. But privately, I couldn't stop analyzing what had occurred. Anthony Walsh had died by suicide, unconnected to the hospital murders. Yet somehow, his consciousness had observed Rebecca Torres's crimes and returned to provide testimony. How? Why? The medical examiner in me demanded logical explanations. I began researching Torres's background more thoroughly. Born in Phoenix, nursing school graduate, unremarkable early career. No obvious psychological triggers for becoming a serial killer. But then I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Anthony Walsh had been her high school boyfriend. They dated for 2 years, broken up before graduation. Anthony had struggled with depression even then, according to yearbook entries and social media posts. Torres had gone into nursing, claiming she wanted to help people. Had watching her former boyfriend's suicide somehow triggered her killing spree? More disturbing was the timeline. Torres's first suspicious patient deaths began shortly after Anthony's suicide, as if his death had somehow awakened something dark in her psychology. The connection seemed beyond coincidence, but I couldn't prove causation without revealing impossible information. Dr. Webb and I discussed the implications privately. What if consciousness doesn't end with clinical death? He asked. What if some part of awareness persists, capable of observing and even communicating under extreme circumstances? Anthony witnessed murders and found a way to report them. But why through us? I wondered. Why wake up during autopsy? Webb had a theory. Maybe proximity to medical professionals, people who might believe and act on the information. Or maybe the autopsy process itself somehow facilitated his return to consciousness. Weeks passed. Torres pled guilty to avoid death penalty, received life sentences for 12 murders across 3 hospitals. Families found closure. Hospital implemented new security protocols. The criminal justice system concluded successfully. But my understanding of death remained fundamentally altered. I began paying closer attention during autopsies, watching for any signs of impossible awareness. Most cases proceeded normally. Bodies remained thoroughly dead throughout examination. But occasionally, I noticed subtle anomalies. Muscle responses that seemed too purposeful. Temperature readings that defied environmental conditions. Never again did a body fully awaken and speak. But I started suspecting that consciousness might linger longer than medical science acknowledged. Perhaps death wasn't the absolute boundary I'd always believed. Perhaps some awareness persisted briefly, gradually fading rather than instantly ceasing. 6 months later, I encountered another case that challenged my assumptions. Car accident victim, massive head trauma, declared brain dead after 48 hours on life support. Family consented to organ donation. During harvest procedures, the body showed unusual responsiveness to surgical stimulation. Not full consciousness like Anthony Walsh, but something more than reflexive responses. The anesthesiologist noted anomalous brainwave patterns despite confirmed brain death. Probably equipment malfunction, he said. But I wondered if residual awareness was still present, trapped in a dying brain. These experiences changed my approach to forensic pathology. I began treating bodies with more reverence, speaking to them during examination, acknowledging the possibility that some form of consciousness might still be present. Colleagues found this odd, but harmless. Dr. Webb noticed my changed behavior. "You're talking to them now," he observed during a joint autopsy. "I know it sounds crazy," I admitted, "but what if they can still hear us? What if some part of them remains aware during our examinations?" He considered this thoughtfully. In medical school, they taught us that consciousness depends on brain activity. When the brain dies, awareness ceases. But Anthony Walsh proved that assumption wrong. Maybe we need to reconsider fundamental principles about the nature of consciousness itself. I started documenting unusual observations more carefully: temperature anomalies, unexpected muscle responses, equipment malfunctions that occurred only during specific procedures. Patterns began emerging that suggested something beyond random chance, but proving consciousness in the dead remained impossible using conventional methods. The Anthony Walsh case file became legend in our department, the suicide that solved serial murders. New residents heard the story during orientation, though we never mentioned the impossible awakening. It became a cautionary tale about thorough investigation and pattern recognition in forensic pathology. I often wondered about Anthony's final moments. Had he truly observed Torres's murders while deceased? Was consciousness somehow separate from brain function, capable of existing independently? Or had his brief return been something else entirely? Quantum consciousness, information transfer, phenomena beyond current scientific understanding. 2 years later, I received an unexpected phone call. "Dr. Rodriguez, this is Margaret Walsh, Anthony's sister. I know this sounds strange, but I need to ask you something about his autopsy." My heart rate increased. What could she possibly know about that impossible day? "What can I help you with, Margaret?" She hesitated before continuing. "The night before Anthony died, he called me. Said if anything happened to him, I should ask you about Rebecca Torres. He'd never mentioned that name before. How could he have known to tell me that?" The implications were staggering. Had Anthony somehow known about Torres's murders before his own death? Had his suicide been motivated by knowledge of her crimes? Or had his consciousness somehow accessed information while deceased, then communicated it both during autopsy and prophetically to his sister? "I'm not sure what you mean," I said carefully. Margaret pressed on. "You arrested a nurse named Rebecca Torres for murdering patients. Anthony told me to ask you about her specifically. He said you'd understand why it was important. Dr. Rodriguez, how could my dead brother have known about her?" I couldn't provide answers without revealing impossible truths. "Sometimes, investigations reveal connections we don't initially recognize," I said diplomatically. "Your brother's death helped us identify patterns that led to Torres's arrest. His death wasn't in vain. It helped save other lives." But Margaret's call haunted me. If Anthony had known about Torres before his suicide, it suggested his death wasn't random depression, but possibly sacrifice, ending his own life to somehow position himself to stop a killer. The theory seemed impossibly far-fetched, yet it fit the available evidence. I began investigating whether Anthony had any connection to Torres's victims. No direct relationships, but all 3 psychiatric patients had attended the same community center where Anthony volunteered teaching art therapy. Had he suspected Torres was targeting vulnerable people he cared about? The community center records showed Anthony had increased his volunteer hours significantly in the weeks before his death. Staff noted he seemed anxious, asking questions about patient safety at local hospitals. He was worried about something, the director told me, but wouldn't say what. Perhaps Anthony had discovered Torres's pattern, but couldn't prove it through normal channels. Desperate to stop her, he'd chosen the ultimate sacrifice, dying in a way that would position his consciousness to witness and report her crimes. It sounded like fantasy, but it explained the impossible sequence of events. If true, Anthony Walsh had planned his own death as an investigative tool, somehow knowing that consciousness could persist after clinical death. The medical implications were staggering, the philosophical implications even more so. Death might not be the end, but a transformation into different forms of awareness. I shared this theory with Dr. Webb, who listened thoughtfully. It suggests consciousness operates according to principles we don't understand, he said. If Anthony could plan to maintain awareness after death, it implies death isn't the absolute boundary we believe it to be. These possibilities forced me to reconsider my entire career. 19 years of examining the dead, assuming consciousness ended with brain function. But what if I'd been wrong? What if the dead remained aware during autopsy, experiencing our examinations but unable to communicate except under extraordinary circumstances? The thought was deeply disturbing. Had I caused pain to conscious beings while believing they were beyond suffering? Medical ethics demanded that we, first, do no harm. But if consciousness persisted after clinical death, autopsies might constitute assault on aware individuals. I began researching alternative methods for forensic examination, non-invasive imaging, external analysis techniques, minimal intervention protocols. If the dead might still experience pain or awareness, we needed gentler approaches to death investigation. Colleagues found my concerns strange but supported research into less invasive techniques. Even if consciousness doesn't persist, Dr. Webb noted, more respectful treatment of the dead benefits everyone, families, staff, and possibly the deceased themselves, if awareness continues in ways we don't understand. 3 years have passed since Anthony Walsh sat up during autopsy and changed everything I thought I knew about death. Torres serves life sentences, families have found justice, hospital protocols prevent similar crimes. The case officially closed successfully through conventional investigation. But privately, I continue questioning fundamental assumptions about consciousness and death. Medical school taught me that death was simple. Brain activity ceases, consciousness ends, body becomes empty vessel. Anthony proved that understanding was incomplete at best, completely wrong at worst. I've encountered other cases suggesting awareness might persist beyond clinical death. Never as dramatically as Anthony's full awakening, but subtle indications that something continues after what we call death. Temperature anomalies, unexpected responses, equipment behaviors that seem more than coincidental. Perhaps most importantly, the experience changed how I treat families of the deceased. When they speak about feeling their loved one's presence, sensing continued awareness, or receiving impossible communications, I listen more carefully. Maybe they're perceiving something science hasn't yet learned to measure. Dr. Webb and I continue working together, but our approach has evolved. We maintain professional standards and scientific rigor, but we also acknowledge possibilities beyond current medical understanding. The dead deserve respect not just for what they were, but for what they might still be. Some nights, alone in the autopsy suite, I speak to the bodies on my table. I don't know if you can hear me, I say, but if you can, I want you to know we're treating you with dignity. We're seeking truth about your death, justice if needed, closure for your families. Whether they hear me or not, it feels right. Anthony Walsh taught me that death might not be the end, but a transition into states of existence we don't understand. Until science catches up with that possibility, the least I can do is maintain respect for consciousness that might persist beyond clinical death. I often wonder what Anthony would think about the changes his impossible awakening caused. More respectful treatment of the dead, saved lives through Torres's arrest, expanded thinking about consciousness and death. His sacrifice, if that's what it was, continues benefiting others years later. The case file sits in my desk drawer, officially closed, but personally ongoing. Whenever I doubt what I experienced, I review the evidence: Torres's conviction, the victims she killed, the lives her arrest saved. Anthony's testimony, impossible though it was, proved accurate in every verifiable detail. I've been a medical examiner for 22 years now, but I date my real education from that Tuesday when a dead man sat up and spoke. Everything before was just technical training. Real understanding began when Anthony Walsh proved that death isn't the absolute boundary I thought it was. The dead may have stories to tell, awareness to share, consciousness that persists beyond our current ability to measure. As a medical professional, I remain committed to scientific evidence and rational analysis, but I also remain open to possibilities that might expand beyond conventional understanding of life, death, and the consciousness that bridges them both.